happening tonight in Vancouver.
We begin with breaking news and reaction from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on the latest development in the Meng Wanzhou case. The two Canadian Michaels have been released, and Trudeau will be speaking minutes ago.
About 12 minutes ago, the aircraft carrying Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor left Chinese airspace, and they're on their way home. They boarded at about 7:30 Ottawa time, along with Dominic Barton, Canada's ambassador to China. These two men have gone through an unbelievably difficult ordeal. For the past 1,000 days, they have shown strength, perseverance, resilience, and grace, and we are all inspired by that.
Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou arriving at Vancouver International Airport Friday afternoon, back to where this saga began nearly 3 years ago, when she stepped off her flight from Hong Kong and was subsequently arrested.
How has this case affected Canada's relationship with China?
Oh, it's been a disaster for the relationship, but there are lots of things that have affected that.
It began with Meng's arrest at YVR in December of 2018, just a few months after a New York court issued a warrant for her arrest. Meng would spend nearly 3 years under house arrest in an upscale home on the west side of Vancouver, spending her time under the watchful eye of her private security and often members of the media. The U.S. charged Meng with fraud over allegations she violated American sanctions against Iran. Both Meng and Huawei denied the allegations. The extradition trial that followed has forever changed Canada's relationship with China.
I think what it really did was crystallize the feelings among a lot of the Canadian sort of political class that China wasn't to be trusted. You know, the hostage diplomacy, the taking of the two Michaels, that had happened to other Canadians before, but they had been non-white Canadians. They had been people of Chinese descent, sometimes with Chinese citizenship.
You were friends with Michael Kovrig, or you are friends with Michael Kovrig?
Yes, yeah, for several years. A hugely generous man with his time, his expertise, his personal kindness. It's been a source of enormous distress to pretty much everybody in the sort of China analysis community. Well, I mean, he hasn't seen his child. I think they were born only a few months after his detention. Just an enormous strain. Same with Spavor, of course, who I don't know, but who was also a popular figure.
Now Meng is free and heading back to China.
And West should be welcomed as a hero. And there's no, if she tears the whole thing up, there might be some financial penalties that the US government can impose on Huawei, which is already basically at war with. But there's nothing it can do about her case.
At YVR, Ashley Burr, City News.
The situation became a little bit more consistent in terms of those delays around 5 o'clock, and then peaked at about 6:30 that day, when we started to see 911 wait times of up to just over 6 minutes.
Delays that could have had deadly consequences on Thursday as E-Comm call takers struggled to transfer 911 calls to dispatch. Normally, 95% of these calls are answered within 5 seconds or less.
With delayed transfer times to the ambulance service, our 911 call takers have to stay on the line with callers until an available ambulance call taker is able to connect.
One of the changes that also needs to be made, according to Bradley, is to a recording you might hear when you call 911 to stay on the line. It's common for people to hang up and then redial as the instructions aren't specific enough.
You hear that recorded announcement. Hanging up is just going to mean that you're waiting longer. And it's also tying up the system, as our call takers do still need to pass that information to BC Emergency Health Services.
And there's another trend that's begun to emerge.
We're hearing in the background sounds of callers hearing the recorded announcement and then asking other people in the room with them to also try calling 911. So we want people to understand that that's not going to mean you're going to get through faster.
I haven't had any direct conversations with with BCEHS on that to find out if there was any unusual circumstance, but it really comes down to what is historically and what we've seen experienced last weekend. is the just not enough call takers to answer all the calls, and that's because of our shortage of staff.
After this summer's heat wave, Health Minister Adrian Dix promised more staff would be hired in these sectors, including 30 call takers. Until those new recruits are trained, Clifford says everyone is trying to do the best they can.
With the promised new staff, when do you think is a fair completion by the government from the government by with the funding and with the promise, 30 call takers, for instance? When do you think we should be? I know they're in training, but
well, they're all going to be implemented by, we're told, by November 1st or 30th.
Our hope is that through education and greater awareness, people will understand the impacts that hanging up your 911 call when you are hearing that recorded announcement has on the system, but also that it has on their own safety in terms of it doesn't mean you're going to get help faster by hanging up.
The new messages on the phone lines is expected to be implemented within the week. In New Westminster, Ria Renouf, City News.
Part of the reason for what we've seen with support for the PPC is the toxic nature of politics today.
As the dust settles on the election, political observers ask party leaders to tone down partisan attacks.
BC is reporting 743 new cases of COVID-19 on Friday and 7 new deaths. There are 5,979 active cases in the province. Of the active cases, 319 people are in hospital and 149 are in intensive care. The new cases are spread out and around the province. 292 were in the Fraser Health region. 111 were in the Vancouver Coastal Health Region, 177 in Interior Health, 106 in Northern Health, and 57 were in the Island Health Region. On the vaccination front, 87.5% of eligible people 12 and older in BC have received their first dose of COVID vaccine, and 80% have received their second dose. A North Vancouver man is calling on the province to find solutions for people facing international travel woes. Remco De Haas received 2 vaccine doses, AstraZeneca and Moderna. But as a result, he doesn't meet the eligibility requirements for travel to some countries. As an IT project manager who works abroad, he says he's been left stranded. He's asking for the province to allow people to get a 3rd shot to ensure people with mixed shots meet vaccine requirements overseas.
I'm very motivated to be vaccinated due to COVID, so I was one of the first in line. My age group, I'm 56, to get AstraZeneca. Then it was in the pharmacies, and then I got a second dose Moderna, so fully vaccinated in Canada. However, I quickly found out I'm normally working as an international project manager, traveling to Europe, States and Australia, that this vaccination status is not seen as vaccinated at the European Union because AstraZeneca in combination with Moderna is not seen as fully vaccinated.
As about 10% of the Canadian population has received mixed doses, according to the federal government.
We've basically taken all of the steps to get right to the edge of the cliff. We're standing on the edge of the cliff.
A dire warning from a top emergency room doctor in Alberta, saying healthcare workers may soon have to decide who lives and who dies.
An update to a story we brought you earlier this year. A man who was charged with harassment in an incident that was caught on camera has been sentenced, but not for his role in that incident. Mohammed Majidpour was sentenced Friday, months after he was charged with several offenses, including mischief, uttering threats, breaking and entering, assault with a weapon, and harassment. While the harassment charge was stayed, he pled guilty to the other 4 charges and was sentenced to 1 day in jail and 1 year of probation, according to the BC Prosecution Service.
What do we want? Climate justice. When do we want it? Now.
Young people from across Metro Vancouver gathered at Canada Place Friday morning for a public rally and to call on the newly formed federal government to take immediate action on fossil fuel expansion and reconciliation. The teenage climate activists from Sustainabiliteens say it's time it's time for those in government to start taking the issue of climate change seriously.
We're a movement of young people across Metro Vancouver who have come together out of the urgency to stop the climate crisis and the need for climate justice now. Since we're young people, this is our future that's being impacted by the climate crisis, and we know that the government needs to act now, and we're frustrated with the lack of action over the past few years. So this is why we're out here today, demonstrating that climate justice should be a top priority for people in power.
None of us went into the healthcare profession to ever have to decide who can live and who can die. We want to care for everybody.
The Alberta Medical Association's president of emergency medicine is warning about the dire situation in the province's hospitals. As ICU capacity continues to be pushed to the limit by surging Delta cases, Dr. Paul Parks says some critically ill COVID patients are not getting ventilators.
This is not an issue about ventilators. We have tons of ventilators. So the vent itself is not a rate limiting step. It's the people that care for the patient after they get put on the vent. That's our precious limited resources, the healthcare workers.
Dr. Parks warns that healthcare workers are standing on the edge of a cliff when it comes to the situation in the province's ICUs. Not only have surgeries been canceled, but doctors may soon be making life and death decisions, even for people who don't have COVID.
It's not normal operating for us to cancel pediatric surgeries or brain tumor surgeries or cancer treatments. That's not normal. But as soon as we move to that triggered, that is indicating that even patients having strokes, heart attacks, maybe a major motor vehicle collision, that could mean we're in a position where we can't provide them the critical care we normally would, even if it's not COVID related.
Alberta Health Services tells us in a statement they've opened up 42 ICU surge spaces in the last week to help meet demand, as well as redeploying resources and staff. In Friday's COVID update, there are 243 people in the ICU, 210 of them unvaccinated. Earlier this week, AHS President Dr. Verna Yu told media the only reason ICU beds were opening were because of deaths. Dr. Parks says Alberta's healthcare workers have done all they can.
We've basically taken all of the steps to get right to the edge of the cliff. We're standing on the edge of the cliff.
In Edmonton, Darcy Ropchan, City News.
Hundreds of volunteers turned out in Squamish on Friday to help search for missing teen Richie Stelmach. The 15-year-old was last seen going to bed Tuesday night at around 10 p.m. at his family home in the 4000 block of the Crescent in the Garibaldi Highlands. Search and rescue crews are asking people to continue keeping an eye on their properties for any sign of the boy and to review any video footage that they could contain a clue as to his direction of travel.
They should make a greater effort to work with the government to make sure that meaningful and decisive action is taken to address the hate that is growing across the country.
After an election that saw little serious discussion about racism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and other forms of hate, activists say they hope to see political parties at least put aside petty attacks and set an example for Canadians.
If in the visible public, you are actually throwing insults or pot shots at your opposition, but then you turn around afterwards and then, when the cameras and microphones are off and say, hey, let's get together over coffee and talk about this. I think that just engenders cynicism within the public.
It's well known that despite animosity in the House, party leaders often take a much softer tone with each other in private. Khan says this sets a bad example for voters, encouraging animosity against opposing parties. Khan says voters shouldn't just see the snipes and jabs, but the deal-making that makes government work.
The push for cooperation that has been found in this election outcome should also be demonstrated in terms of less partisan attacks and less partisan rhetoric from our leaders.
Chaldean's Mensa says the election results should tell party leaders they must find a way to get along. But Mensa says the rise of the populist People's Party is also a sign that these political attacks may be going too far. The party tripled its votes from 2019, but didn't win any seats. Mensa identifies the PPC as part of a trend of right-wing populism focused on resentment against established political parties.
The PPC and its brand of politics combined with the polarization that we're seeing in our politics, the toxic communication from politicians, I think calls for a move towards civility by politicians to cut down on these personal attacks and address some of the concerns which are motivating people to find home in the PPC.
In Ottawa, Shaoli Lee, City News.
10,000 fans will be wearing these shirts at BC Place tonight to honor residential school survivors. The BC Lions are trying to raise awareness ahead of the country's first National Truth and Reconciliation Day on Thursday. The team design was created by artist Corinne Hunt, a special guest at the event. Phyllis Webstad will also be at tonight's game. She's the one who started Orange Shirt Day back in 2013. She previously said it was a dream for her to have survivors and their families honored at a Lions game. The Lions donated 350 tickets to residential school survivors to attend tonight's game, while the $20,000 in sales from the shirts will go to Webstad's Orange Shirt Society. We'll have more on this story tonight at 11 o'clock.
Well, Bill, the story here is really about who's not here right now. And, you know, you went through a bit of a contract impasse back in 2017. Brock went through it in 2019. How difficult is it as a player to not be here when camp starts, like Elias and Quinn have to do?
Yeah, no, it's, you know, for them, it's a sticky situation. It's tough. I know I kind of went through it and eventually signed right before camp to be here, but you know, everybody has their own path. Everybody is different that way. You know, obviously they, you know, whenever they get here, we can't wait to have them back at camp, and hopefully they can get it done and resolved soon.
Last season was difficult on and off the ice for the Canucks organization. You see a lot more smiling faces. Just, does it feel like a fresh start?
Yeah, no, I mean, it really does. I mean, I think, you know, for us, everything that we went through last year, the COVID thing, and, you know, obviously not having a great year, I think, you know, just kind of motivates us to come back stronger this year. And I think there's a lot of hungry guys in that room, a lot of guys that want to prove people wrong and prove to ourselves that we can do it. So we're really looking forward to this year.
Finally, you guys finished last in the North last year in that tough setting. Do you think with the additions now and Jim being very aggressive that the expectation should be playoffs?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think you know, I think we are playoff ready. We got to go into this year with that mindset of we're going to make it. And like I said, you know, we can talk about it all we want, but we got to go out there and prove it now. And you know, it starts here at camp. It starts here in the exhibition games, and leading into the season, we got to be ready to go.
Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thanks.
This week in science, we're talking Jurassic Park with mammoths. Kind of. That's the elevator pitch, more or less, for a new company called Colossal, which has its sights set on resurrecting the long-extinct woolly mammoth. Again, kind of. Let's start with why anyone would want to do that. Scientists are testing the idea that reintroducing large animals to the Arctic tundra can help to shape it back into grassland, which is much better at trapping carbon emissions. The animals could knock over trees, fertilize grasses, and clear away some of the insulating snow from the permafrost, preventing its thaw and the release of all that trapped greenhouse gas. And a nature reserve called Pleistocene Park in Siberia is already a testing ground for this concept. There you can find bison, elk, yaks, horses, all kinds of things. But the woolly mammoth might be the best animal for the job, because it's huge, and thus very capable of reshaping its ecosystem. Of course, they've been extinct for several thousand years now, but that's where Colossal comes in. It's partly the brainchild of Harvard genetics professor George Church, best known for inventing ways of reading and editing DNA. Having already studied mammoth DNA taken from fossils, Church and his team are planning to use CRISPR gene editing technology to tweak the embryos of Asian elephants. They are the mammoth's closest living relative, and the tweaks would make them more mammoth-like. So it's less like resurrecting an old species than creating a brand new one. But these so-called mammophants would presumably look and behave just like the woolly mammoths of old. Of course, there are ethical concerns to all this. One scene from Jurassic Park might spring to mind.
Our scientists have done things which nobody's ever done before. Yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could that they didn't stop to think if they should.
On top of that, some scientists are very skeptical that putting a big herd of these creatures in the Arctic would have any impact at all on climate change. Still, Colossal is aiming to have a viable mammophant embryo ready in just 6 years' time, using $15 million in donated cash. With This Week in Science on City News, I'm News 1130's Curtis Doring.
Vancouver's news is always available on the radio with News 1130 or online at citynews1130.com. Your next edition of City News is tonight at 11 o'clock. Have a great night.